It's a Monday morning, we're in the center of town and we're here to test drive the new BYD Seal, which has been updated for 2025 with some spec changes, a new color, but more importantly, new suspension options for both the performance and the premium. And we're going to put these cars to the test over the next few hours to tell you what's what. Now, the new BYD Seal is just a little bit of an update, which means that the majority of the changes are limited to just the aesthetics, which means that under the skin, you still find the same 82-ish kilowatt-hour battery for both the performance and the premium models. However, naturally, the performance can do 0 to 100 in about 3.8, whereas the performance has it in about 5.9. There's obviously a discrepancy in range as well, with the performance being able to do a little bit over 500 kilometers, if I recall correctly, whereas the premium will do a little bit more than that. I think it's a difference of about 50 or 60 kilometers, if I recall correctly. In terms of the aesthetic changes, however, the biggest change comes in terms of the paint. This is the new shark grey color, which is quite fetching on this car. It looks a little bit like Audi's Nardo grey, but it is metallic, which I think makes the car look quite good. It is unfortunate, however, that they haven't fixed these daytime running lights, which I'm not a fan of. Now, moving down the side, both variants still use 19-inch alloy wheels. However, the designs have changed. This is now a slightly more aggressive multi-spoke design compared to the more aerodynamic directional alloys that you used to get on the BYD Seal upper tier models. But in terms of the tires, they still run Continental Eco Contact 6Q tires, which are high performance, high quality, and decently quiet. Now, as we move further down the side, it is again more of the same. You still get the same very typical 3-box design, which I think looks quite good. You still get the flush door handles should you want them. There is still a little bit of contrasting down at the very bottom sills of the doors in order to reduce the visual mass of the car, and you still get the BYD design badge here, but the wing mirror design has slightly changed, and so this is another way to tell the difference between a pre-facelift and a facelifted Seal. The other difference is that now for the performance variant like we have here, the brake calipers are done up in red in order to again underline and underscore the fact that this car is the hotter variant. Now, moving toward the rear, everything remains exactly the same. We still get the same faux diffuser at the back, as well as the full LED light bar here, although now the chrome that goes all the way across appears to be slightly more prominent than before. And again, it is just a matter of blink and you miss it changes. You still have BYD Seal badging here, the big BYD badge here, and the all-wheel drive badge down here. Now, in terms of boot space, once again, nothing has changed, which means that the boot volume and capacity in here is just as good as it's ever been, which means that this is more than enough for a family of 5's worth of luggage without any issue whatsoever. And even on this all-wheel drive model, there is still plenty of space underneath the boot floor to carry your charging cables. However, primarily, I'd like to highlight the fact that it seems that BYD Malaysia listens to exactly what we say, because there is now a sunglasses holder up here, nicely magnetized, and we have a sunblind for this panoramic roof. Both things that we complained about when we took this car out on test when it was first introduced, I want to say about a year ago, maybe a little bit longer than that. And so the fact that BYD Malaysia is responding to criticism and making fixes where necessary is great. Now, the rest of the cabin is broadly the same as we've seen before, and so you have this massive 15.6-inch screen, which has the usual operating system and has the ability to turn and twist if you want it to. Of course, you get wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, a couple of Qi wireless chargers here, 2 cup holders here, an NFC pad here, a decently sized center console bin, and now the ability to use your phone as a key. So you now have a Bluetooth key and NFC key as an owner, so you can pair via your car with your phone, and then you just don't need to carry a key at all. Everything else in here is exactly as we've seen before, and so you have an electrically adjustable seat with memory function, replete with angle adjustment for the seat base, which is lovely. We also get ventilation, heating. There's heating for the steering wheel. There's a lumbar function for the driver's seat, which is always nice to see. There's plenty of adjustment to the steering wheel. There's a heads-up display on this performance model. Again, this is all the things that we've come to like and love about the BYD Seal. Unfortunately, there is one thing they haven't changed, and that's the fact that with the air conditioning, it is still, unfortunately, an affair where you have to play around with the individual vents in order to adjust where the blower angle is. There's still no adjustment on the vent itself. I suspect that is because it would have required a more significant redesign of the dash, but ultimately for a facelift, this is still pretty solid. Speaking of solid, the material quality in here is just as good as it's ever been. Everything in here feels like it's screwed together nicely. Nothing shakes, nothing rattles, although of course the odometer on this car is only 99 kilometers, like it's brand new. And the material quality is all as good as it's ever been, with lots of soft touch materials about the place, especially in places where you touch. And of course, you still get a fantastic ambient lighting system as standard. Now, one of the things that BYD is not talking about, however, is what appears to me to be an update in terms of some of the material. So for example, there is now a lot more shiny plastic about the place. There's even some chrome here on the door card. Now, again, BYD Malaysia isn't telling us that it's been changed, but I'm pretty sure it didn't used to look like this. Let me know in the comment section below. And life in the back of the BYD Seal is still as pleasant as it's ever been. As you can see, I have a huge amount of knee-room and a pretty decent amount of headroom where my head sits. Now, I make that distinction because this new electric sunblind does eat into headspace just about here. But because your head is rested back here rather than up here, this bump doesn't really intrude on headspace. Instead, the overall design of the car still remains the biggest factor in determining rear headroom. Now, the other thing that hasn't been fixed, because they couldn't, is the fact the floor in this car is quite high, which means that sat like this, as you can see, I have no under-thigh support. I can stretch out to enjoy some under-thigh support, but because the front seats are mounted quite low, which is great for the driver and the front passenger, I have nowhere to tuck my feet in underneath the seat in front of me, which means that basically you're going to be sat like this. Now, in terms of other amenities, I do have a USB-A and USB-C port behind the retractable cover. I have a couple of crotch coolers, a small pocket underneath it for stuff. Very good, comfortable, sort of nice, high quality headliner. I've got a center armrest here which floats very nicely, unlike the ones that you get from Toyota. And of course, I do have a couple of ISOFIX mounts on the rear seats, as well as one more for the front seat should you have a bulky rear-facing child seat. It would be a lot more practical to put in the front, provided that you disable the airbag. Now, in terms of the overall amenities back here, again, this is broadly what you'd expect from the Seal, and the updates haven't really changed much. The material's all good, practicality is still well catered for, with no less than 3 pockets behind the front seats and a decently sized door bin here. We still get a Dyne audio system as standard, and overall, life is pretty good. Which means that the only question now is, how much of a difference has the updated suspension made to this, which is the BYD Seal Performance, a car that we have previously accused of being very fast in a straight line, but kind of rubbish through corners. Now, as I mentioned introducing this video, the BYD Seal hasn't really been updated that much. It's just a facelift with some minor spec changes. So for the performance variant that we're driving today, the power outputs remain the same, which means that 0 to 100 time is still 3.8 seconds, as denoted by the badge on the back. But the biggest update to this car comes in terms of the suspension. Now, this car used to come with frequency selective damping, or FSD, which was pretty much an all-right sort of suspension setup, as we've seen in our review, or we talked about at length in our review. We did clarify the fact that this suspension is supposed to do more. They're promising that it does more than it does in reality. And so to us, it was sort of like not really that big of a deal. It's not really worth the upgrade if you don't need the performance. Now, for this 2025 model year car, they have updated the suspension yet again. So for the performance, this now uses BYD's very latest suspension setup called Disus-C, which is a form of adaptive adjustable suspension. Now, they claim that with Disus-C, the suspension is now able to react faster to road conditions and is able to provide a wider breadth of ability in terms of the variation between comfort and sport settings, which means that sport should be stiffer and comfort should be softer. Now, we have been driving this car primarily in sport in order to sort of understand just how stiff this car actually is. And to be fair, it is pretty stiff when you put it in sport mode. Now, in terms of the overall damping, it does actually feel very similar to the car that it replaces, or to the outgoing suspension setup. The only difference being that this car now seems to settle down a lot faster, which in slightly more typical speak feels like a set of stiffer shocks, which means that, again, the rebound rate is much better controlled. Now, this might not seem like a big deal because it isn't really to most people, but for those who are looking at a BYD Seal as a sort of car for them to drive enthusiastically, especially on the weekends and so on, an update like this would make a significant difference, because it would, in theory, make the car slightly more confident to drive. As far as we can tell though, having tried to use comfort mode in this car in order to try and feel what it's like over the lumps and bumps, honestly, the differences and changes here are very minimal, because even in comfort mode, as I've just set it up in now, it does feel like the secondary ride is a little bit softer, so as in when you hit bumps, it doesn't feel quite as jarring as it used to. in the model with FSD, or frequency selective damping. But overall, when you're driving, once the suspension sort of compresses and loads up a bit, you can't really tell a significant difference. And so to me, once again, it does feel like the suspension should not be the deciding factor between which model you go for. Instead, it feels to me like, as I've said in the reviews of this car that we've done in the past, your choice between the performance and the premium really ought to be driven primarily by range, because both of these cars use the same 82 odd kilowatt hour battery, which provide very significant range, at least compared to other EVs within this segment. So for about 200,000 ringgit for this particular car, for example, you can travel about 520 kilometers WLTP or something to that effect, whereas in the rear-wheel drive model you can do about 580. Now, having driven the premium rear-wheel drive, we can say that if driven primarily in town, you could get a range of as far as 650 kilometers, because that car is quite efficient. However, in this, you're going to struggle to really be able to meet even that 520 kilometer WLTP range, because this car is very powerful. However, if you are driving primarily over longer distances, then you have to kind of choose what it is that you want. Do you want the security of all-wheel drive, or would you rather have the security of that range? And as for town driving, to me at least, there's absolutely no need to buy this performance model, because you don't need all that power all the time anyway. And more importantly, when you're driving about in town, because the specification differences are very minor in terms of the other stuff, you're really not losing out. Does that change the way I see the Seal? Not really. At about this price point, this is essentially the only sports saloon or electric sports saloon within this range. Other competitors within this space, to my mind, include things like lower-end variants of the BMW 3 Series, or even the new BMW 218 Grand Coupe. And this is obviously a larger car with more power, even if you get the rear-wheel drive model, which means that it just feels that it's a slightly more practical option between the two. On top of that, this car is easily the most refined to drive every day when you're stuck through traffic and so on and so forth, which means that the Seal appeal hasn't changed. This is still an excellent car for you day-to-day driving in. It's still not the sharpest tool in the shed, even with this new Disus-C suspension. It hasn't transformed this car into some sort of fantastical sports saloon that'll hunt down an M340i. But is it still a good value buy? Absolutely, and I would very easily recommend this to anyone buying within this space. However, price competitors within this space have changed quite significantly. For example, now there's also the Smart Hashtag 3 in addition to the Zeekr 7X, both of which compete at broadly the same price point, which means that whether you like it or not, buyers are going to be cross-shopping these cars, because the saloon body style alone may not be compelling enough. But how does this car fare against those two? And more importantly, what is this car's real-world consumption like? Well, we can't answer those questions until we get this car out for a full review, so stay tuned for that. As you can see, motoring journalists do test cars very extensively. Now, as a result of our little test drive today, there are a few things that we can glean. Firstly, there is the fact that the updated frequency selective dampers that you get on the premium model now makes that car drive exactly the same as the performance used to. As for this performance model, the Disus-C has helped to stiffen things up a little bit and reduce rebound, but overall the differences are relatively negligible. Now, bearing in mind the fact that both of these cars have seen a price reduction of about 8,000 ringgit despite the updated specifications, the BYD Seal remains a pretty good value buy as far as we're concerned. Now, stay tuned for our full review, which will come as soon as we can get these cars on schedule, and then we'll let you know things like power consumption, etc. In any case, thank you so much for watching our little media drive of the new BYD Seal. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icons, and in fact, every time we make a new upload, don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All the links are in the description below, including the link to join our new WhatsApp channel. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe, and electrify your life.